We started the show because there's a wave of pessimism swooping across America lately. Many of us believe that our best days are behind us. Some people don't even believe America was great to begin with. They're very skeptical of a lot of the values. What are the ideas and principles behind America's founding mean to you? Obviously, you didn't run America; you ran Canada. But what do they mean to you? And what do they meant to the world? Are these principles important for the world?
Well, first of all, when I think about, as a Prime Minister of Canada, I don't think of them in terms of America's principle. I think of them kind of as the common Western and particularly Anglo-American heritage that Canada is a part of.
Yep.
But first of all, let's be clear what the problem is. There are those who have an assessment that, as you say, better days are behind us, that the future is not as optimistic, and that's an assessment that one can reasonably or not reasonably have. But you said another one, that America never was very good to begin with. Yeah. That's the real problem, Joe. The real problem in the West, and let me talk about the West more than America, although, this is the flagship country. The real problem in the West is not that our prospects are not good. It's elements in our own countries and our own societies that do not want us to succeed. Yeah. They do not want us to succeed.
They want to tear down the current system.
They want to tear down. The modern left, called Marxist often, is not really socialist. It's nihilist. Its ethics are entirely nihilist. And it's all about ripping everything down. I could go into, all the reasons why I think this is so. It doesn't really matter what the explanation for it is. It's all bad, and it needs to be fought and opposed.
Yep.
And the desire we all have to make constant change in our and progress in our societies should not have as its assumption that everything is wrong and terrible and awful. Quite the contrary. It's that our societies are sufficiently good at their core that this kind of progress is always possible.
Yep.
And, look, Canada, the United States, obviously speaks specifically in my own country, and I can see lots of things wrong with my own country, and you can see lots wrong with yours. But yet, I can tell you travel around the world, and there's no other time in history and no other place you'd rather be. I say the great contradiction. As you know, I watch American politics, almost in great quantities. The reason I do is I kind of ignore the politics of my own country because I'm too emotional about it. So I can be an analyst on U.S. affairs, and so I watch American politics all the time, and I'm just fascinated by this notion that is just everywhere now, the so-called woke notion that America is fundamentally a racist country. And yet what I see is all these supposedly repressed races trying desperately to become Americans and to join the United States. Yeah. It's not that there aren't problems, historical and present, that are real, but the core of our countries are great, and they have great futures, and there is no alternative. The adolescent egos of the woke university crowd is not an alternative governing philosophy for any society. And
where's this illiberalism coming from? This is complicated. You call it nihilist, but there's this. It's new on the left to have this illiberalism, right? And that's something that we didn't really have that as much, or did we always have this massive?
Well,
illiberalism?
it's always been on the extreme left.
But it's kind of, it's leaked into the rest of society.
What the far left and the far right always have in common?
They're both illiberal.
Yeah, they're both illiberal.
But more of the left seems to have taken.
But if you look, go right back to Marx and Engels, of which I'm actually very knowledgeable. I mean, it was always illiberal.
Yeah.
It was always illiberal. And anyone who says that, Marxism was distorted into totalitarianism by the Soviets or the Chinese, whoever, is missing the whole. You read original Marxism, the totalitarianism is at its root. Mm-hmm. Marx's view was that. And you hear the same terms thrown around today, that his opinions were not opinions, they were science. And anyone who disagreed with his thoughts on what is happening today or what will happen in the future is not merely wrong on the issue, he is going against the fundamental science of humanity.
Really, so Marx would say you're going against science when you disagree with me a lot.
And therefore, because you're simply arguing against facts, then you get to the kind of Soviet mentality that all dissent is essentially a mental illness, or something that needs to be re-educated and corrected.
Or banned from social media,
and
no
this,
doubt.
And this has been that crowd's philosophy, going back, by the way, before Marx to Rousseau and others. And it's become now, since the 60s, very large in university movements and university campuses.
Are we at a cultural tipping point? This is spread everywhere. Is this going to continue? Are we reaching a peak? Like, how's this going to play out?
I hope it doesn't. If it plays out, our societies fail.
So we have to fight it.
Our societies fail. Yeah.
So how do we fight it?
I believe that in terms of there is a I think. It's not maybe as stark as it was in the Cold War, but there is a competition of systems right now. There's no doubt about it. A more not a certain, by no means a truly free market kind of American model, but a market-oriented American model, essentially, in spite of all of its non-market aspects, essentially driven by private enterprise and private innovation. And there's a Chinese model, which is all about state control and using markets as a tool of state control for economic and political power.
Totalitarian society that lets markets work and uses them.
I'm not sure I'd call it totalitarianism, but certainly an authoritarian. It's an authoritarian capitalist model.
Yep.
And
you think that's what would come here if this liberalism won?
Well, I think that is the main challenge. That is the main challenge.
That's the main challenge from China.
That's the main challenge of the United States. And look, what I argue that democracies, I hope, I believe, and I kind of believe. I must admit I'm getting a bit more pessimistic. I kind of believe in hope will triumph. I always tell people this is because democratic societies, democratic capitalist societies, and I think the two are inseparable, by the way, the reason we succeed over time is not because we ever quite get it right. In fact, our societies are too complicated and pluralistic to ever get it exactly right. Mm-hmm. It's that when we make mistakes, they tend to correct over time. Eventually the worst problems.
There's self-correcting mechanisms where authoritarian societies don't have as many self-correcting mechanisms.
No, they have the opposite.
The governments double down on mistakes.
Tyrants, authoritarians must double down because the claim to an authoritarian's claim to power is that he is specially gifted and always right. As soon as an authoritarian says, "Oh, that was a real screw up," that's kind of the end of then somebody else says, well, I'm the guy who will never screw up, not you. So, like Mao Zedong is the extreme example of that. Just every decade,
just kept doubling
bigger
down
mistakes
on
than the
bigger
decade
things.
before. Deng ultimately corrected that as within the context of that system with collective leadership and the experiment with markets, etc.
I was told by my mentors that Lee Kuan Yew was a huge influence on him.
Lee Kuan Yew Lee Kuan Yew is example. Lee Kuan Yew is kind of, because he's a bit of a mixed model.
He is, yeah.
But Lee Kuan, obviously in a very different environment. Lee Kuan Yew is Lee Kuan Yew is a rare exception. Because, as I say, almost all dictatorships for life almost always end in tyranny and stagnation, neither of which happened with Lee Kuan Yew.
Lee Kuan Yew ran Singapore for 55 years or so.
Neither of which happened. Singapore continued its dynamic growth all through his time in office. And it's certainly a quasi-authoritarian state, but it didn't get worse on that regard. In fact, it actually got somewhat better.
I think it seems like the lesson from the last several decades is that you have to be authoritarian to get past maybe 10 or 12 years in office. That seems to be the rule.
Maybe. Look, I guess what I was saying, so this is why I think democracies will prevail, but let's be under no illusion. We will still only prevail in the end if we make better decisions than they do. And right now, I don't think it's, whether it's economics or the virus or anything, I don't think you have to be a really deep political analyst to say that, generally speaking, the Chinas have been making better decisions in the last couple of years than democracies.
Yep. Well, hopefully things will self-correct, and maybe there's natural limits to the authoritarianism.
But remember, that what's so threatening about what I say is the kind of far woke left is that it's trying to end the democratic system. I mean, it's not just trying to, pass big deficits in modern monetary theory and new education systems. It's trying to snuff out any opposition to those things. Its goal is authoritarianism.
Yeah, so you stop freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, freedom of property.
But that will not succeed, because that authoritarianism is so obviously inferior and incompetent to the Chinese version that it cannot possibly prevail.
That incompetence won't prevail. I tend to think that China is not going to allow enough creative destruction that will be required by the innovation recession coming in the next 10 or 20 years, and that maybe is an optimistic thing that we'll hopefully be able to be better to deal with in North America.
Yeah, I think there's every reason to believe, especially, I come to this country. Look, the dynamism of this country, the entrepreneurial dynamism in this country is just impossible to ignore. No matter how heavy-handed the role of government becomes or large it becomes, this is just such an entrepreneurial culture and so freedom-oriented in terms of personal behavior.